Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, 2 weeks ago, our country witnessed a shocking assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. Now, I disagree with Donald Trump in almost every policy area imaginable. I am frequently shocked and outraged at the plans he has for our country and the words that come out of his mouth. And I have dedicated much of the last 8 years to fighting his agenda. But regardless of my strong feelings about Donald Trump's behavior, I unequivocally and unabashedly condemn with every fiber of my being the attempt against his life. This was not just an attack on a man, but an attack on our democracy. Political violence erodes the very foundations of our nation. The concepts of freedom of speech, of peaceful transitions of power, of a democratic government at its core, these cannot exist if political violence is allowed to fester and to go unchecked. And if you think that this one assassin's bullet was a bolt out of the blue and not part of a wave of violence that has threatened this nation for years, then you have missed the point of what my Democratic colleagues and I have been imploring you to hear for some time. Election workers, many of them working for free, face near constant threats of violence. In one recent instance, an Indiana man pleaded guilty to threatening to kill an election worker who said that there were no irregularities in a recent election. That man said, quote, 10 million plus patriots will surround you when you least expect it and will expletive kill you, close quote. That is political violence. In another instance, Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi's husband was bludgeoned over the head with a hammer by an intruder in his home who had been there to capture Ms. Pelosi, interrogate her, and possibly, quote, break her kneecaps because of her liberal views. That is political violence. The death threats surging against Vice President Harris, former President Obama and his wife Michelle, and Governor DeSantis, as well as many others, including videos online of individuals holding guns making assassination threats. That is political violence. The plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer and overthrow parts of the state government. That is political violence. The brutal, deadly attack 3 years ago against this very building, with rioters breaking through police barriers to run through these halls chanting, "Kill Nancy," and "Hang Mike Pence," and even hanging a noose outside the building. These rioters battering Capitol Police officers and forcing members of Congress and their staffs to go into hiding, squatted in spaces under desks or in closets. That is political violence. This assassination attempt, as horrific as it is, should surprise no one. And you would think a political party that almost lost their presidential candidate through an act of political violence would have something to say about the way their leaders keep talking about the next election. Donald Trump has warned there will be a, quote, bloodbath if he loses. Republican Ohio State Senator George Lang said just last week at a rally for J.D. Vance that he is, quote, afraid that civil war might be necessary if Republicans lose the November election. President of the right-wing think tank and Project 2025 leader, the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, said on Stephen Bannon's podcast, quote, "We are in the process of the second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be," close quote. Republican former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin said in August of last year of Trump's indictments, "Do you want us to be in civil war? Because that's what's going to happen. We're not going to keep putting up with this. We do need to rise up and take our country back," close quote. I could go on, but it's more and more of the same. And I hear nothing from the other side of the aisle in this room about these statements. Do you support a bloodbath if you don't get the election outcome you want? Do you justify violence if the left does not agree with you? And what exactly has preoccupied this Republican majority while their allies threaten violence to their political enemies, real and imagined? We have chased down baseless conspiracy theories designed solely to influence the 2024 election in favor of Donald Trump. We have spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours of staff time in more than 100 transcribed interviews chasing false accusations against President Biden, supporting an impeachment effort that seemed designed to fail, and hunting for a smoking gun that simply does not exist. And instead of admitting that these investigations found no corruption, coercion, or unethical behavior by the Biden administration, Republicans chose to just dig deeper and spend more money. Imagine what could have happened if we had spent these thousands of hours of staff time and those millions of taxpayer dollars addressing even one aspect of the political violence that now threatens our country. Perhaps Had this Republican majority lifted a finger to help a nation that is awash in guns, the assassinate Butler would not have had such easy access to the weapon he used to fire on that crowd. Director Wray, your agency is responsible for addressing some of the most serious issues of our time. The Bureau fights gun violence, which claims the lives of 40,000 Americans every year. It protects election security from growing threats from malign foreign actors who are working tirelessly to influence our elections. It protects against domestic terrorists and violent extremists who have been a growing threat in recent years and have carried out horrific mass shootings and deadly events around the country. And so much more. I apologize to you, Director, that instead of supporting you in these missions in the 118th Congress, some of my colleagues have instead hindered your work, maligned your agents, and called to abolish and defund your agency, all for political gain. It is despicable, especially from the party that claims to, quote, back the blue. And I know that you and your many agents and employees have paid the price for these baseless attacks. I know you have faced a barrage of threats, distrust, and vitriol from the public as a result of these wild, politically driven conspiracies. I know it has become even more dangerous and difficult for you to come to work each day. I may not agree with you on everything, but I sincerely thank you and every employee in your agency who continues to protect our country. The FBI is vital to keeping America safe, and I pray that today we can focus on the real, substantive work of the agency. It is the least we owe our country in these times. As I said in my opening statement, political violence is a scourge and entirely unacceptable, no matter the source or the target. Last October, a far-right conspiracy theorist broke into Nancy Pelosi's home and bludgeoned her husband. Prominent Republicans mocked the attack and promoted conspiracy theories about it. Last August, an armed Utah man who threatened to kill President Biden was killed as FBI agents attempted to serve a warrant on him hours before President Biden landed in his state. Some on the right claimed that the man was simply a, quote, Second Amendment enthusiast. In recent weeks and months, those on the right have repeatedly called for, quote, civil war, with an Ohio state senator saying that if Republicans lose the election, quote, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. The president of the Heritage Foundation likewise said that, quote, we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be, close quote. Director Wray, it's obviously important that we respect First Amendment protections, but there is clearly a point at which some violent rhetoric crosses over into threats of violence or leads to actual violence. Could you describe how the FBI looks at this relationship between rhetoric and action and what you are seeing around the country?
So I appreciate the question, and this is an issue that I've been talking about for some time. In our view, there is a right way and a wrong way under the First Amendment to express your views, no matter how passionate or even angry you are. And violence and threats of violence is not the right way. And we don't care what you're upset about or who you're upset with. When, from the FBI's perspective, when it turns to violence and threats of violence, that's when we have to draw the line. That's when we get engaged. And there is an alarming phenomenon that we've seen over the last several years of that kind of passion and heated rhetoric turning into actual violence and threats of violence. We've seen it against public officials of all sorts. We've seen it against law enforcement. The number of officers shot and killed in the line of duty in this country is frankly outrageous and alarming. And I know that because every time an officer is shot and killed anywhere in this country, since the day I started as FBI director, I personally call the chief or the sheriff to express my condolences and to talk to them about the victim's family. And the number of those shootings that are ambush related, meaning somebody is targeting law enforcement because they're law enforcement, is particularly alarming. I have made around 400 of those phone calls. It's almost every 5 days that a law enforcement officer is killed in the line of duty. And that is an example of the kind of ways in which passions and heated rhetoric can bubble over into violence.
Thank you. Members of Congress, their families, and their staffs have witnessed an alarming rise in threats against them. I appreciate the work your agency has done to investigate and address these threats, but I'm concerned that we do not seem to be stemming the tide. What is the FBI doing to ensure that members of Congress, their families, and their staffs are safe?
So we have a very close relationship with the Capitol Police. And we have members of the Capitol Police, for example, who are on some of our task forces. We share intelligence information about things that we're seeing, trends that we're seeing with Capitol Police and others in law enforcement. Obviously, if we have specific information about an effort to target a member of Congress, then we're getting with Capitol Police in a much more specific way. But those are some of the things that we're doing.
Thank you. Now, Director, your office is leading the investigation into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Republicans in Congress, including members of this committee, have repeatedly called for defunding the FBI. What impact would defunding or even just limiting your funding have on the FBI's ability to conduct this and other investigations?
So I understand that there are heated views, opinions about us, just like there are about every institution in today's America. But cutting our funding is incredibly short-sighted, and the people it really hurts are state and local law enforcement and the American people we're all sworn to protect.
Thank you. During my remaining time, I want to turn to a different matter. In recent days, Republican members of Congress have attacked presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris as a, quote, DEI candidate, which presumably is code for women and person of color. It's not a new theme for them. In May, Chairman Jordan wrote to you claiming that because of DEI initiatives, the FBI is no longer hiring, quote, the best and brightest candidates to fill the position of special agent. With my remaining time, Director Wray, can you please answer the following questions? Is it true that hiring women and people of color means that FBI is no longer hiring the best and the brightest to serve as law enforcement officers? Is there any evidence that women and people of color are less effective in law enforcement roles? And what message does it send to prospective applicants when the leaders demean them and make judgments about them based solely on their race or gender?
Witness may respond.
So any notion that we have lowered our standards, our hiring standards, is just not accurate. In fact, our standards are as competitive and selective as ever. We have tens of thousands of people applying, and our selection rate is about 3.1%, which is more selective than just about any university in the country. And most of our applicants, I think something like 50% of them are coming from military or law enforcement backgrounds. About 50% of them also have advanced degrees. The average age is around 31, which means they're bringing a wealth of personal and professional experience when they arrive. And to suggest that those people, because of efforts related to diversity or anything like that, are less qualified, frankly, is not at all consistent with what I see, having visited all of our field offices and seen these young people in action. And I think is an insult to those hardworking men and women who've signed up to dedicate their lives.